The Roaring Twenties, a time of fancy cars, bootleggers, big parties, flappers, prohibition, speakeasies, and the eventual, not-so-fun, Great Depression. Materialism and consumerism were the name of the game. Enter F. Scott Fitzgerald, who wrote The Great Gatsby to reveal that materialism ultimately never satisfies. All the glitz and the glam of buying on credit during the 20s led to the eventual death and decay of the Great Depression in the 30s. The characters in the novel bring to light the attitude of the day where everyone wanted more, but it's never enough. The classic novel still hits a very relevant chord in society today. Jay Gatsby is the epitome of the American dream during the 20s. He is, of course, both the novel's title character and its protagonist. Gatsby is a mysterious, fantastically wealthy young man. Every Saturday, his fairy tale-like Gothic mansion in West Egg serves as the site of extravagant parties. Later in the novel, we learn that his real name is James Gatz, who was born in North Dakota to an impoverished farming family. While serving in the Army in World War I, Gatsby met Daisy Fay, now Daisy Buchanan, and fell hopelessly in love with her. He worked briefly for a millionaire and became acquainted with the people and customs of high society. This, coupled with his love of Daisy, inspired Gatsby to devote his life to the acquisition of wealth. Gatsby's grand and lavish mansion symbolizes his high lifestyle. It also shows the inner conflict of Gatsby and foreshadows his loneliness hidden behind his lavish estate.
It also symbolizes his unbound love for Daisy. Gatsby uses his new money to buy the grand house, thinking it is similar to Daisy's old money childhood mansion, where he fell in love with her. Though he progresses a lot in life, his luxurious lifestyle does not bring satisfaction to him. We see Gatsby's need to go back to the past and win Daisy back all over again in the quote, "I wouldn't ask too much of her," I ventured. "You can't repeat the past." "Can't repeat the past?" he cried incredulously. "Why, of course I can." He looked around him wildly, as if the past were lurking here in the shadow of his house, just out of reach of his hand. Nick Carraway comes from a well-to-do Minnesota family. He travels to New York to learn the bond business. There he becomes involved with both Gatsby and the Buchanans. Though he is honest, responsible, and fair-minded, Nick does share some of the flaws that are so abundant in the culture of East Egg. However, of all the novel's characters, he is the only one to recognize Gatsby's greatness, revealing himself as a young man of unusual sensitivity. They were careless people, Tom and Daisy. They smashed up things and creatures, and then retreated back into their money or their vast carelessness, or whatever it was that kept them together, and let other people clean up the mess they had made. While this quote is about Tom and Daisy Buchanan, it says more about Nick's character than anything else. He passes judgment on people often. Nick comes from old money, but buys a little cabin next to Gatsby's monstrous mansion, trying to make a go of things apart from his father's money. Nick is particularly taken with Gatsby and considers him a great figure. He sees both the extraordinary quality of hope that Gatsby possesses and his idealistic dream of loving Daisy in a perfect world. Though Nick recognizes Gatsby's flaws the first time he meets him, he cannot help but admire Gatsby's brilliant smile, his romantic idealization of Daisy, and his yearning for the future.
The private Gatsby, who stretches his arms out toward the green light on Daisy's dock, seems somehow more real than the vulgar, social Gatsby, who wears a pink suit to his party and calls everyone old sport. Nick alone among the novel's characters recognizes that Gatsby's love for Daisy has less to do with Daisy's inner qualities than with Gatsby's, that is, Gatsby. His dream because his heart demands a dream, not because Daisy truly deserves the passion that Gatsby feels for her. Further, Gatsby impresses Nick with his power to make his dreams come true. As a child, he dreamed of wealth and luxury, and he has attained them, even though he did so through criminal means. Gatsby's power to dream lifts him above the meaningless and amoral pleasure-seeking of New York society. In Nick's view, Gatsby's capacity to dream makes him great, despite his flaws and eventual undoing.
It's time for the mystery quote!
Did you get the book?
Yay! Okay. So here's how we're doing this. If she gets it wrong, I'm going to open to a random spot. If she gets it wrong, of who said the quote and who they are saying it to, I squirt her with a squirt bottle.
Here we go!
blank. That's all you get.
What?
Yep. We're all white here, murmured blank.
Daisy Buchanan.
My turn.
Okay.
It was from Jordan Baker.
Okay. Not only that, but you're rude. Blank's sitting in there all alone.
Oh no. No, I'm going to read it again.
Not only that, but you're rude. Blank is sitting in there all alone.
Oh. Wait, I have to say the person? The blank?
Yeah.
Or who said it? Okay. Daisy!
No.
Daisy is sitting there all alone. Gatsby said it about, or, no, I got this. Nick said it about Daisy sitting there all alone.
No, Gatsby said it about Daisy sitting there. I don't know who said it. I think Gatsby.
Scorpion! Mystery document!
Daisy Buchanan, his cousin, lives across the bay and invites him over to catch up. Daisy is the woman that Gatsby loves. She had promised to wait for Jay Gatsby until the end of the war, but after meeting Tom Buchanan and comparing his extreme wealth to Gatsby's poverty, she broke her promise. Daisy uses her frailty as an excuse for her extreme immaturity. Daisy and Nick's little get-together turns out to be not so fun and borderline awkward when Nick learns that Daisy's husband, Tom Buchanan, has a mistress in New York. A brutal, hulking man, Tom Buchanan is a former Yale football player who, like Daisy, comes from an immensely wealthy Midwestern family. His racism and sexism are symptomatic of his deep insecurity about his elevated social position. Tom is a vicious bully, physically menacing both his wife and his mistress. While at the Buchanan mansion, Nick meets Jordan Baker. Daisy's longtime friend, Jordan, is a professional golfer who cheated in order to win her first tournament. Jordan is extremely cynical with a masculine, icy demeanor that Nick finds initially compelling.
The two become briefly involved, but Jordan rejects him on the grounds that he is as corrupt and decadent as she is. Hardly anyone knows anything about the mysterious Gatsby until Nick receives a personal invitation to one of Gatsby's giant parties. Nick comes to find out that Gatsby has a thing for Nick's cousin Daisy, and he asks Nick to invite Daisy over for tea. Nick struggles for a bit with whether he should reunite his married cousin with his next-door neighbor, but he does it anyway. Ever since Gatsby met Daisy, he's been obsessively pursuing her, buying a house across the bay from her, keeping a scrapbook of everything she's done since they met, and throwing enormous parties, all with the hope that he could acquire her just as he's been able to acquire everything else. After an initial awkwardness at the tea party, Gatsby and Daisy hit it off and begin a passionate affair. Meanwhile, Nick gets to know Tom's mistress a bit better. To reach her, they must travel through the Valley of Ashes, a place between East and West Egg created by the dumping of industrial waste. It represents how morality and social code of conduct are dropped out of the industrial society. It also depicts the miserable plight of people like George Wilson, who live among the ashes without ambition. This is a highly effective symbol that represents the divide between the poor and the rich class in the society of that time and even the present. This is the Valley of Ashes, a fantastic farm where ashes grow like wheat into ridges and hills and grotesque gardens, where ashes take the form of houses and chimneys and rising smoke, and finally, with the transcendent effort of men who move dimly and already crumbling through the powdery air. Occasionally, a line of gray cars crawls along an invisible track, gives out a ghastly creak, and comes to rest, and immediately the ash-gray men swarm up with leaden spades and stir up an impenetrable cloud, which screens their obscure operations from your sight.
Nick and Tom pick up Myrtle Wilson, Tom's mistress, and have a party in the apartment Tom bought for Myrtle. An earthly, vital, and voluptuous woman, Myrtle is desperate to improve her life. She shares a loveless marriage with George Wilson, a man who runs a shabby garage. She has been having a long-term affair with Tom Buchanan and is very jealous of his wife, Daisy. Her husband, George Wilson, is a listless, impoverished man whose only passion is his love for his wife, Myrtle. He is devastated by Myrtle's affair with Tom, At the party, Nick gets pretty drunk and doesn't remember most of what happens. Ever present outside the apartment are the watchful eyes of T.J. Eckelberg. The long-forgotten and fading eyes, surrounded by yellow-rimmed glasses, are printed on a prominent billboard overlooking the Valley of Ashes. The eyes represent the decaying commercialism which forms the backbone of the American dream. Fitzgerald's opinion on the matter is clear because of how Gatsby dishonestly earns an immense amount of wealth in order to win back Daisy. These eyes also represent the hollowness of life through Gatsby's eyes, because despite having all the American dream says you should have, his eyes reflect emptiness. To George Wilson, the billboard represents the eyes of God that watch over every segment of society. To Nick, they represent the waste of past which sticks around though vanished. As the summer heats up and time goes on, Tom becomes suspicious of his wife's relationship with Gatsby. While at lunch at the Buchanan's mansion, Gatsby stares at Daisy with such undisguised infatuation that Tom realizes Gatsby is in love with his wife. Despite the fact that Tom is cheating on Daisy, he is enraged at the idea that his wife could be unfaithful to him.
The group drives to New York and gets a room at an expensive hotel. While at the hotel, Tom confronts Gatsby for having an affair with Daisy and accuses him of being a criminal. His fortune comes from bootlegging and other illegal activities. Daisy finally realizes that her allegiance is ultimately to her husband, Tom. Tom feels so confident after his attack on Gatsby that he sends Daisy back to East Egg with Gatsby, as if Gatsby can't do anything to hurt his relationship with his wife anymore. However, when Nick, Jordan, and Tom drive through the Valley of Ashes, they discover that Gatsby's car has hit and killed Myrtle, Tom's lover. The group hurries back to Long Island, where Nick learns that Gatsby that Daisy was driving the car when it struck Myrtle, but that Gatsby intends to take the blame. The next day, Tom, who is still bitterly mourning the death of his mistress, tells Myrtle's husband, George, that the yellow car that killed Myrtle belongs to Gatsby. George feels absolutely convinced that the driver of the yellow car is also her lover. After hearing a gunshot the next morning, Nick rushes to Gatsby's mansion and finds Gatsby floating in his pool, dead. He then finds the body of George Wilson, who shot himself in the head after murdering Gatsby. Nick puts together a small funeral for Gatsby and is unable to find a single person to attend besides Gatsby's dirt-poor father, himself, and the corpse of the great Gatsby. After the depressing funeral, Nick ends his relationship with Jordan and moves back home to the Midwest to escape the disgust he feels towards those in Gatsby's life and the emptiness and decay of the life he's found in Long Island. Nick reflects that just as Gatsby's pursuit of Daisy was corrupted by the dishonest acquisition of money, the American dream has decayed from the pursuit of happiness and self-reliance into the pursuit of material wealth.
Gatsby's ability to turn his dream into reality are arguably what makes him great. However, Fitzgerald reveals that Gatsby's corrupted dream, along with that of the American dream, can never be enough. Both are coming to a bitter end because satisfaction cannot be found in things, not people just out of our social rank, not material wealth, and not expensive possessions. We constantly thrive to get that one thing beyond us, thinking that if we can acquire that one thing, we will be finally happy. This same dream was Gatsby's downfall. Now let's take a look at some symbols you may have missed along the way. The green light pops up many times in the novel and represents Gatsby's dream and hope. It also represents everything that haunts him and takes him into the past. Green also signifies money, his memories with Daisy, and the gap between his past and his present. He deliberately chooses the house in a direction from where he can have the enchanting sight of green light on the end of Daisy's dock. He loves to stand at his dock to stare at that green light, which represents his innermost desire to revive his past. He is hopeful that one day he will win back the lost moments. The artificial green light also stands for his artificial and unrealistic goals. He stretched out his arms toward the dark water in a curious way, and far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. Involuntarily, I glanced seaward and distinguished nothing except a single green light, minute and far away, that might have been the end of a dock. This brings us to Daisy. The name Daisy is also symbolic. A daisy is a flower with white petals and a yellow center. Universally, the white color represents purity, chastity, and innocence, whereas yellow and gold, which also appear throughout the novel, embody corruption, death, and decay. Similarly, Daisy appears to be innocent and pure, but her heart is filled with lust, carelessness, and corruption. She lets Gatsby believe that she will leave Tom for him, but later it is found that money is more important to her than love could ever be.
The Great Gatsby portrays three different social classes. There is old money, Tom and Daisy Buchanan, new money, Gatsby, and a class that might be called no money, George and Myrtle Wilson. Old money families have fortunes dating from the 19th century or before, have built up powerful and influential social connections, and tend to hide their wealth and superiority behind a veneer of civility. The new money class made their fortunes in the 1920s boom, and therefore have no social connections, and tend to overcompensate for this lack with lavish displays of wealth. The Great Gatsby shows the newly developing class rivalry between the old and new money in the struggle between Gatsby and Tom over Daisy. As usual, the no money class gets overlooked by the struggle at the top, leaving middle and lower classes, like George Wilson, forgotten or ignored. Nick and Gatsby are continually troubled by time. The past haunts Gatsby, and the future weighs upon Nick. When Nick tells Gatsby that you can't repeat the past, Gatsby says, "Why, of course you can." Gatsby has dedicated his entire life to recapturing a golden, perfect past with Daisy. Gatsby believes that money can recreate the past. Fitzgerald describes Gatsby as overwhelmingly aware of the youth and mystery that wealth imprisons and preserves. But Gatsby mixes up youth and mystery with history. He thinks a single glorious month of love with Daisy can compete with the years and experiences she has shared with Tom. Just as new money is money without social connection, Gatsby's connection to Daisy exists outside of history. Thanks for watching Crash Course Gatsby History with Leah and Macy.
Join us next time.
Cheers!